Thank you very much. Thank you. It is great to be back in South Carolina. It's great to follow my friend Ted Cruz. I will tell you, I just came from Orlando to a group called The Awakening, and the previous speaker to me was Raphael Cruz. So this is my following the Cruzes all around the country. But it's great to be here, and it's great to share a stage with my good friend Frank Gaffney, who I've been on the radio many, many times with, and Secure Freedom Radio, and have had the opportunity to work with him in the past. The last time I shared a stage, he may remember, was way back in 2006 when I was going around the state of Pennsylvania at the time when we were, well, thank you for that. Okay, just one, but I'll take it. Right now, I'll take it. Two. Okay, a few Pennsylvanians. All right, thank you. Traveling around the state of Pennsylvania, running for re-election in a year where we were losing a war. We were losing the war in Iraq. And I was very, very concerned back then, as Frank was, about what was going on in another country, in Iran, in another country, in Venezuela, in another country, in Russia, in another country, in China. And so for me, this was a time where I just couldn't stay silent, and I saw a president, not Obama, who was not being honest with the American public about who our enemy was and the threats that confronted us. If you recall, he called that war a war on terrorism. It is no more war on terrorism than World War II is a war on blitzkrieg. It is a war against radical Islam, and we didn't name it then, and we still haven't named it now. But I went around and gave a series of speeches called The Gathering Storm of the 21st Century. Likened it to what was going on in the 1930s when Churchill was trying to tell the world that there was this evil out there and that we had a responsibility to confront it. When I did that, a lot of people said that I was a warmonger, that I was Chicken Little, that I was someone who wanted to go to war. You might see standing next to me here and wondering who this young man is. He is, as you know, from South Carolina. He is a Citadel cadet. He's also my son, Daniel, who... And as you know, he could stand there at attention for as long as his dad could ever talk. He's here with a couple of his friends who are sophomores. Rutherford and Pete, stand up. Go ahead. Come on, stand up. And you may know today is Corps Day at the Citadel, so my other son, who's a junior, who's also, I have two sons at the Citadel, who, you don't have to applaud again. That's good enough for the Citadel. I don't want to go to their heads. But I'm very, very proud to be a Citadel dad. And for anyone who suggests that I or anybody is a warmonger and wants to send our sons and daughters to war, I think all you have to do is look at our commitment, look at two sons who may in fact go into the military someday, and I can tell you I don't want to send my boys or any boys into war unless it is absolutely necessary for the security of our country. And that should be our policy. But the bottom line is, as we all know, as much as Americans hate war, and we do, and thank God we do. Thank God we hate war. Thank God we're an optimistic people, that we think there's always a way that we can figure out a way around the evil that confronts us. We also are practical people. We know evil exists. We see it, unfortunately, on our television, but we see it around the world. And the question for a great leader is to be able to discern that nature of that evil and the magnitude of that threat, and whether it does, in fact, rise to the level of threatening the security of our country. That's what leaders have to do. They have to be realists. They have to look at these threats honestly and assess them honestly. They can't assess them based upon a rosy-eyed conclusion that we're powerful and no one will ever want to challenge us, or that all people want to do is control their own little backyard or have more money or have more power. But we have to look at threats as they are. And unfortunately, this president has done anything but that. Now, I could spend an entire speech, and I know it's late, so I won't. I could spend an entire speech talking about how this president has ignored evil, has misinterpreted evil, has maybe even intentionally turned his back to evil and allowed it to prosper around the world. I was in Israel just a few months ago, and one of the senior advisors to Prime Minister Netanyahu told me, he said, in 2 years from now, when you or someone else gets elected president, he said, make sure that you are ready to be a wartime president, because that day is coming, unfortunately. Now, I hope that that is not the case, but unfortunately, this president is doing everything that is necessary to create conditions for evil to expand and for war to break out. Look at what's going on in Iran. Frank mentioned that I have been focused on Iran for a long, long time. I introduced the Iran Freedom Support Act back in 2004. And that bill, yes, it funds the pro-democracy movement, which I was told at the time, if you recall, didn't exist. There was no pro-democracy movement in Iran. And it also put sanctions on a program that also didn't exist, according to our intelligence, which should give you pause about how good our intelligence is today. They told us in 2004 and 2005 that the Iranian nuclear program had been dismantled, and it was no longer active, and they were no longer pursuing nuclear weapons. And I authored a bill to put sanctions on that nuclear program and fought it. To show you how consistently wrong this president was, I asked for a vote. We lost by 3 votes to pass this bill, and by the way, President Bush opposed me. But he also opposed me? Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and yes, Barack Obama. All 4 opposed sanctions on Iran. All 4 opposed supporting the pro-democracy movement in Iran at a time when we could have made a difference, prior to the Green Revolution. Everyone talks about the Arab Spring. They forget before the Arab Spring was the Iranian Spring. And instead of doing what we did, which is to support an Arab Spring that by and large overthrew governments that were favorable to the United States, we decided to at best sit on the sidelines against a government that was hostile to the United States, that had declared war on the United States in 1980 and had not rescinded that order. No, you need someone, and you need to look at the situation with clear eyes as we're confronting Iran today. Iran is a country that is clearly on the path to nuclear weapons, and as we saw from the announcement today by the Saudis, they believe this negotiation, which is, to quote one of my favorite people, a bad deal, that this negotiation will lead to an Iranian nuclear weapon. And the Saudis, as they announced today, now have a nuclear deal with South Korea. You will see others begin to announce their nuclear deals as we see the president lay the groundwork for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Whether they sign this bad deal or not, this president is going to allow them. He has been very, very clear that he is not going to stand in their way. We should stand in his way. No deal is better than a bad deal. No deal. And then turn it around to do what we need to be doing. Put increased sanctions on Iran. Put increased diplomatic pressure on Iran. Prepare, if necessary, for the possibility of a military option. That has to be on the table to be a credible threat to Iran, to get them to do what they must do, which is dismantle their centrifuges and shut down this program, or else. Ladies and gentlemen, I would have been the 48th signature to that letter had I been in the United States Senate. And the sad thing is that this is not a bipartisan issue, because it should be. When I voted, when I had the bill before the United States Senate that I talked about, more than a couple handfuls of Democrats voted for sanctions on Iran back in 2006. But now it's become a partisan issue, and it's sad. It's sad. This should be an issue that brings everybody together to stop an organization, a caliphate that has established itself in Iran, that is clear about what their intentions are. Again, realism. Looking at what they say, not in PR releases to the Associated Press, but what do they say to their people in their country about what they're going to do? And I hear all this, well, it's only a small percentage of people. You hear this about ISIS, you hear this about Iran, that it's only a small percentage of people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, only 7% of Germans during World War II were Nazis. But it's who controls the levers of powers that matter. And who controls ISIS, who controls that caliphate, and who controls Iran are radical Islamists who are intent on spreading Islam by the sword all over the world unless they are stopped. That is the reality of what we are dealing with in Iran today. And if they get a nuclear weapon, you will give a country that has the worst record on spreading terrorism of any country in the world. And you will give them, number one, the ability to do so with impunity. Because now they will have the shield of a nuclear weapon. No nuclear power has ever been attacked. I suspect one might never be. That's why they want it. They want to be able to widen the field of play, to use technology. We're under attack right now. We're under attack every day through the internet, through cyber warfare, every day. And I'm not talking the government, I'm talking your businesses. And it's coming from China and Russia and yes, Iran and North Korea. There are all sorts of technologies that are available to harm the United States, to hurt the West. And if they have that shield, they will now have the capability to do what they've said they wanted to do. But we're always afraid of what would happen if they weren't ultimately protected. People say, why is Iran different? Because Iran is the only radical Islamic regime that wants not to just destroy the little Satan in Israel, but the great Satan in the United States. Listen to what they say. And while I was not one of those people who signed that letter, I will say to the Iranian government, as someone who's contemplating running for president of the United States, I would say to the Iranian government simply this: whatever deal you sign, if it leads, as I suspect this deal will, to you having a pathway to a nuclear weapon, this president will not enforce it. This president will call you to account and will try to shut down your program no matter what that deal says. So hear that message loud and clear. Hear that message loud and clear. That whatever deal you strike with someone who's trying to earn his Nobel Peace Prize is only going to last as long as the next election, because America, I believe, over the next 18 months is going to recognize, as we have in the past, when our security is truly at stake. Americans are not a warring people. Americans are not an expansionist people. But Americans know when someone picks a fight that we can respond to that fight and win. There are a lot of other issues that I'd love to discuss with you, but I know the hour is late, and so I'm going to limit my remarks to what Frank asked me to come and talk about, which is Iran. But I will tell you that the next president of the United States is going to be dealing with the most dangerous world since at least the height of the Cold War and potentially since the Second World War. And I would argue that experience would be a very good thing. Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. Be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Senator Santorum, my name is Albert Small. it's clear from your remarks you understand the American official purpose of government. And it's important that you remind the news media of that and anybody else that would be up for president. From the Declaration of Independence, I'm sure you can quote it.
Well, the purpose of the government, unlike any other country in the world, I always, and you gentlemen's probably heard me give this talk because I said it this morning and I'll say it again, I say it all the time, which is the purpose of the government is very clear. It is to protect the rights that God has given each and every one of you. Now, I will tell you a little story because this is something that each and every one of you should be aware of. Not just Chris Como saying to people that our rights don't come from God. I know you've probably heard that line. But listen to what happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. You might be familiar with a group called the Junior States of America. It's an organization that gets the best and brightest out of our high schools all over the country. And they do model legislatures. They have little governors and legislators, and they pass bills, and they go through all this, wonderful thing to teach kids civics. And it's really it's a great group. My daughter participates in it. And she asked me to come and speak to their regional conference in Washington, D.C., which I did. There were about 1,200 kids there. And here's what I did. I thought, I want to find out what our kids are learning in school, the best and the brightest. So I asked them a question. I said, all of you put your head down and close your eyes. I'm going to ask you a question. Where do our rights come from? And I'm going to give you a list of answers, and you raise your hand when the one you think comes up. So they all put their head down, and I said, okay, where do your rights come from? Number one, the government. About 25% of the kids raised their hands. Then I said, God. The place broke out in spontaneous laughter. The children laughed at the idea. They were poking each other. They laughed at the idea that their rights came from God. Those are the future leaders of our country. That is what our public education system is training our children to learn. So the answer is the federal government's role, first and foremost, is to protect our rights. Our role is to educate our children what those rights are and where they come from.
Senator Santorum, thank you for being here. I'm Virginia Ellisor, a retired school teacher, lifelong political activist, and lifelong resident of South Carolina. I'll ask you the same question I asked Senator Cruz. And I'll preface it by saying Michelle Bachmann, I think it was King, said that Boehner made a deal. My question is on defending this country. Thank you for what you do for national security. I'm concerned about sealing these borders and protecting the United States. I've fought that battle all my life.
Thank you.
And I'm losing, and it's because I'm not getting help from my Congress. And anyway, Michelle Bachmann and King, in an interview on one of the stations, said that Boehner made a deal with Obama back in September to be on board with his executive amnesty. The American people put the Republicans back in office in the House and the Senate, and the two things we asked y'all to do were shut down Obama's executive amnesty and shut down Obamacare. And you let us down on both issues. Why is the Congress rolling over and letting this communist dictator destroy my country? Y'all know what he is, and I know what he is. I want him out of the White House. He's not a citizen. He could have been removed a long time ago. Larry Claiborne's the one that got the judge to say that the executive amnesty is illegal. Everything he does is illegal. He's trying to destroy the United States. The Congress knows this. What kind of games is the Congress of the United States playing with the citizens of the United States? Y'all need to work for us, not for the lobbyists that pay your salaries. Amen. Get on board. Well, let's stop all this and save America. You know, what's going on, Senator Santorum? Where do we go from here? Ted told me I've got to wait now until the next election. I don't think the country will be around for the next election. Obama tried to blow up a nuke in Charleston a few months ago, and the three admirals and generals, he has He has totally destroyed our military. He's fired all the generals and all the admirals that said they wouldn't fire on the American people if you asked them to do so, if he wanted to take the guns away from them. This man is a communist dictator. We need him out of that White House now. And the Congress of the United States is the only one. We've lost our Congress. We've lost our executive.
Ma'am, I would ask you please to allow the senator to
answer
the question.
I got your question.
You've made the question clear. Please let him answer.
Okay, okay. First off, I take somewhat offensive referring it to you because I'm not a sitting member of the Senate, so I'm not taking blame for any of that stuff, right? I mean, but I will tell you this. You've hit on one point that I absolutely agree. This is a complete lack of leadership. The bottom line is that I can tell you when President Obama issued that executive order, I don't care what the executive order was about. When he issued an executive order or executive action that said that he's not only not going to enforce the law, but he is going to actively change that law and make new law and be able to act and force the agencies to act pursuant to that law, he did something that, as you mentioned, the word tyrant comes to mind. That is not, the president does not have the authority to do this. It is the most dangerous, the president has done a lot of dangerous things. This is the most dangerous thing the president has done because what he has done is set a precedent. He has set a precedent for how the executive can act unilaterally. We're already dealing, as many of you know, with the problem of judicial supremacy, where the courts think they can act and call the shots for everything on every issue, of which I push back against and will be happy on a separate question to tell you how we need to do that. But when all the leaders of Congress, Republican and Democrats, saw this president do that, they should have recognized how serious this was. This is not just another political issue. This is not, and I'm going to repeat, this is not about immigration. Oh yeah, it has obviously has a lot to do with immigration. But the bigger, more serious issue for freedom in this country is a president who has now established a precedent that he can decide what the law is and change it irrespective of what Congress does. Ladies and gentlemen, had I been in leadership, and I was at one point, I did, in fact, call members of leadership and ask them. Immediately I called them, I said, look, you cannot treat this like any other issue because it is unlike any issue we've ever dealt with. This is the unraveling in as bold a place you can do of the Constitution of this country. And so I said to them that I would shut down the government of the United States. I would announce it, that we are not going back into session. We are not confirming anybody. We are not passing any bills. And we are going to have hearing after hearing after hearing on the unconstitutionality of what this president has done. We are going to focus single-mindedly. And we will challenge Democrats to stand up for their own oath of office, to stand up for the body in which they serve in, instead of letting this president neuter the people's house, to stand up and say, no, that is not your purview. I agree with what you're doing, but that you can't do that this way. Even the president for years said, he's not an emperor, he can't do this. But they didn't lead. They looked, and I'm telling you, I've been there. Here's what happens when you get to Congress. You worry about making the trains run on time. You're worried about moving things and all your other responsibilities, and you don't step back and sometimes see the forest for the trees. And that's what all these leaders have become. They've become pencil pushers, trying to get things done instead of recognizing there's a fire raging that's going to burn the whole forest down as you worry about the tree in front of you. Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, is it on? Thank you. Senator Santorum, or excuse me, Congressman.
I was a senator and a congressman, so either work. I'm not offended being called a congressman. I sort of like
Thanks
it.
for coming.
You bet.
In 1980, I was one of the Marines off Iran for the hostage rescue attempt.
Thank you for your
April
service.
25th, 1980, we left 8 heroes in the desert. Those 8 men had their bodies desecrated by the mullahs. The Iranians were then involved in the 1983 Marine barracks bombing. They were involved in bombing the American embassy, the Dhahran barracks, Khobar towers, the 2 embassies, Tanzania, and I forgot the other one in Africa. They were involved with Hezbollah actions in South America. We believe they were involved with the USS Cole. We know that they trained the 9/11 terrorists. They were the ones who were making the IEDs with a copper insert to kill American soldiers for the last 15 years.
In Afghanistan.
I want to propose a hypothetical question to you, and I'll walk away once I give the question to allow you to respond. But if you, I'm assuming you're here because you have intentions of running for president, if you become president, what will be your response to any of these actions by the Iranians while you are in power?
I think what you just laid out is a case that when Iran said that they are at war with the United States, they mean it. That's what you basically laid out. Iran has been at war with the United States, and we have played games under now unfortunately, 4 administrations, 5 administrations, pretending that that was not the case. Now, I might, because I love him so much, give Ronald Reagan a pass. He was busy defeating the Soviet Union, which in his mind, and I think rightly so, was the higher priority. But there's no excuse for the rest. There's no excuse for the last few presidents to not see the threat that Iran has. Iran is. They are not a poor country. They are not a country that's not developed educationally. They have capability. This is a country that is a serious threat to our country. And we have uniformly ignored it to the point of now engaging in a legitimizing exercise. You heard probably today that the United Nations is already contemplating removing all of the sanctions against Iran, not if they comply with this bad deal, if they simply sign it. I was there in the late 1990s and saw this game being played by the last Democrat president, a guy named Clinton, who said, trust me, we can negotiate with the North Koreans. We can get a framework agreement if we give them all these things and remove sanctions and treat them and bring them into the community of nations. They will not need a nuclear weapon. They won't develop a nuclear weapon. The next thing we heard was an explosion. And I fear that's the next thing we're going to hear after this negotiation. Iran has never, ever kept a deal. Ever. They only came to the negotiating table because the sanctions, in part the ones I passed and others, actually were hurting them to the point where they needed some relief. So they went to the person who could give them relief, our president. Now Iran is hurting even more. Oil prices, gas prices, half of what they were. Iran is in trouble if we simply close the deal, but no, we're going to revive this country that has killed our men and women, thousands of them, and we say nothing about it. We do nothing about it except appease. That's why I gave this talk, The Gathering Storm of the 21st Century. Americans realize that appeasement by a great power is the most dangerous thing you can do. We need to be strong militarily. We need leaders who articulate a clear vision for the country and don't draw arbitrary red lines. And if you do draw red lines, you enforce those red lines. I would make one final comment. And this goes back to the previous 2 questions about what the United States Senate should be doing. They should demand that the president bring this agreement to the United States Senate for ratification. And it should be bipartisan. This is potentially the most important national security treaty in our lifetimes. And not to bring that to the United States Senate to have the people have a right through their representatives to express their opinions. For a president to negotiate it in secret, to not release any information, and then sign a deal and say this is what the law of the land will be, is itself a tyranny that no Democrat or Republican should stand up for in the United States Senate. One more. I'm told Frank said one more.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Allison Guerriere. Thank you so much for coming today at Santorum. I'm actually coordinating a demonstration at the U.S. Capitol on Saturday, September 12th. I have reserved the West Front lawn, and the name of the demonstration is Rise Up Against Jihad, and I need some help, and I'd really love for your help, Mr. Gaffney. So, and if you'd like to come and speak, I'd love to have you come and speak too. I know it could be like the politically incorrect kiss of death for a candidate, I don't know, but anyway, I was wondering if you had seen the video that the Iranian military and government officials, and I think it circulated a lot, called "The Coming is Upon Us."
I've not seen it.
And I think it was done over a decade ago, and I'm sure you know the Iranians are an apocalyptic messianic regime, and they believe that all these different things have to happen so that their Messiah Mahdi is going to come back. And I really believe that, you know, Obama's helped to orchestrate all those things. I think he's he's an Iranian plant, probably coordinated by Valerie Jarrett, you know, Iranian-born. So.
Well, as a matter of fact, again, if you go back and read those speeches I gave when I was traveling the state with Frank, I talked a lot about that. I talked about the 12th Imam. I talked about the fact that a few years ago, several years ago, there was a huge infrastructure project in Iran. An infrastructure project building a very elaborate boulevard between Qom and Tehran, which I suspect none of you know about, correct? Anybody know about this elaborate infrastructure? Well, you don't count. Because our leaders never told us anything about it. Why would they? Because we were at war with terrorists or we're at war with violent extremists. And in the case of Iran, we're not at war with them. So why would we tell you about this multi-million-dollar beautification and infrastructure paving project that connected a little place in Qom called the Jamkaran Well to the government center in Tehran? Well, you'd have to know what's at the Jamkaran Well that would have to be connected. Well, that is the place where the 12th Imam resides. Well, used to reside when he was alive many centuries ago. But he is returning. In fact, there was a poll done in the Arab world about when the Mahdi is going to return. And in certain Arab countries and in Iran, close to a majority believe soon, imminently. Why would they believe that? Because their leaders say it all the time. They say he is coming back. And if you understand, again, the nature of the enemy that we're facing, which is a theocracy that is, in the case of Iran, fixated on eschatology, the end times, you would understand that when the Mahdi comes back, he comes and rises out of the well and makes a parade to Tehran. And so they spent tens of millions of dollars on something that our government says is a fantasy, that doesn't exist, that isn't real, and that we need not be concerned about. This is what I say when we have to have a dose of realism when it comes to dealing with this particular enemy. Why? Because we are Americans and we're tolerant people, and when we particularly hear about people of a different faith, our natural inclination is to be tolerant. Our natural inclination is to be accepting. Why? Because we believe the First Amendment applies. right? We believe in people's freedom to practice their religion. We don't want, we find it just completely distasteful to think about the concept that you hear from the Middle East, which is the holy war. This is something that is an anathema to the American heart and spirit. So I understand why presidents and people in this country don't want to talk about it or find it offensive even to bring it up. But leaders lead. Leaders have an obligation to tell the truth. When I was in the United States Senate, I always said, people ask me, what is your job like? How can you compare this job to any other job you've had or anyone that you know about? And I said, you know what I found as being a United States Senator? The thing I end up spending more time doing than anything else is teaching. We need leaders who are willing to teach and tell the truth to the American public about what we know. Let me thank you so much for Frank Van Hipp. I don't know if Van's still here. If he's around. I know and others who were behind this and putting this together. Thank you very much for doing it. Thank you for being here in South Carolina. I want to thank you for one other thing. Your senator, Lindsey Graham, has been on the forefront of these issues and doing a heck of a job in leading on national security in this country. And I just want to let you know, because I know Lindsey's thinking of doing other things, and that's fine. But I want to let you know that you have someone in Washington who understands the threat that we confront and is doing one great job in alerting the American public about that threat and confronting this administration in the United States Senate, including standing up for the Defense Department and funding. So thank you all very much, and God bless.